Word explained more than any long story could have, because it carried with it images of chaos, of urgency, of lives balanced on the edge of seconds. "You know how to use it?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a requirement. And this time, for the first time since she walked in, there was the faintest hint of something else in her expression. Not pride, not arrogance, but certainty. "I know enough," she said. And when the three men returned, carrying a locked case between them, their earlier attitudes were gone completely, replaced by a quiet attentiveness that bordered on respect, even if they didn't fully understand why. The owner opened the case, revealing exactly what she had asked for. And as he walked her through the details, his tone was professional, focused, completely different from the way the interaction had started. And the men who had laughed earlier watched in silence, their assumptions unraveling piece by piece as they realized they had misjudged her entirely. When the transaction was finished and she turned to leave, the bell chiming once more as she stepped back into the daylight, none of them spoke for a moment, and then one of the men exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, and the owner glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "That," he said, "was someone who doesn't get the luxury of being wrong," and the words settled heavily in the room, lingering long after she was gone, because the truth was simple and uncomfortable. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had revealed something about themselves in the process, something small and loud and careless, and for the first time that day, none of them felt like laughing. The bell above the door gave a soft metallic chime as she stepped in, a sound so light it barely disturbed the tension already hanging in the air. And for a moment, nobody paid her much attention because the shop wasn't the kind of place where someone like her usually walked in, not dressed in pale blue scrubs, not with her hair tied back in a loose, tired bun, not with that expression of quiet exhaustion that came from 12-hour hospital shifts and too many nights watching people fight for it. Their lives under fluorescent lights, the men at the counter, three of them, broad-shouldered, loud, full of the kind of confidence that comes from never being questioned, were in the middle of a conversation that revolved around calibers, recoil, and something about real strength. The kind of talk that always circled back to proving something without ever quite saying what it was. And when one of them finally noticed her standing near the entrance, hands loosely clasped, eyes scanning the rows of polished steel and matte black firearms, he nudged the others with a smirk that didn't bother to hide itself, because in his mind, this was already amusing, already predictable, already a story he'd tell later about the clueless woman who walked into the wrong place. "You lost?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear he wasn't actually asking. And the other two laughed under their breath, not loudly, just enough to echo the sentiment, to reinforce the unspoken hierarchy they believed in. She didn't respond right away, and that silence seemed to irritate them more than any comeback would have, because it wasn't submission, it wasn't confusion, it was just quiet. She stepped closer to the counter, her shoes making soft, measured sounds against the floor. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, low, and completely uninterested in their tone. "I'm looking for something specific," she said. And that only made them grin wider, because now it was a game. Now it was entertainment. And the same man leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the glass case. "Lady, this ain't a toy store," he said, dragging out the words like he was explaining something obvious to a child. And then, with a sharp chuckle that tipped over into outright mockery, he added, "Not a toy store, B." And the word hung there heavier than the rest, ugly and deliberate. The kind of insult meant to provoke a reaction, to get a rise, to establish dominance in the simplest, crudest way possible. The other two snorted, one shaking his head as if this was all too easy, and for a second it looked like they expected her to flinch, to leave, to shrink under the weight of it. But she didn't. Instead, she simply tilted her head a fraction, her gaze moving from one man to the next, not with fear, not even with anger, but with a kind of clinical assessment, the same look she might have given a patient whose symptoms didn't quite add up. And there was something unsettling about that, something that didn't fit the script they'd already written in their heads. "I didn't say it was," she replied, her tone unchanged, and that calmness cracked the rhythm of their laughter just enough to make them glance at each other. Unsure why the moment suddenly felt less fun, the man at the counter scoffed, pushing himself upright. "Then you're definitely in the wrong place," he said, and this time there was less humor in it, more impatience, because the joke wasn't landing the way he expected. She reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, and for a brief moment all three of them tensed, not out of fear exactly, but out of instinct, before she pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it on the glass, sliding it toward him. "I need this," she said, and he hesitated, then glanced down, expecting something trivial, something that would reinforce his assumptions. But what he saw made his expression falter, just slightly. It wasn't a random request. It wasn't vague or naive. It was precise, detailed, written in a neat, practiced hand that listed specifications most casual buyers wouldn't even know to ask about. He picked up the paper, scanning it more carefully now, and the other two leaned in, curiosity replacing amusement. "Where'd you get this?" one of them asked, his tone shifting despite himself. She didn't answer immediately, and in that pause something shifted again, something subtle but undeniable, like the ground beneath her. Conversation changing just enough to make everyone aware of it. "Work," she said finally, and that single word carried more weight than they expected, because it didn't come with explanation, didn't offer context, just sat there, solid and self-contained. The first man frowned, glancing back at her, trying to reconcile the image in front of him, the tired nurse in scrubs, with the request in his hand, and for the first time, doubt crept in, thin and unwelcome. "You a cop or something?" he asked, half joking, half serious, and she shook her head once. "No," she said, and that was it. No elaboration, no attempt to fill the silence that followed. The bell above the door chimed again, louder this time, and all of them turned instinctively as a man stepped inside. A man who didn't need to announce himself, because the shift in the room happened instantly, like a switch had been flipped. He was older, not by decades, but enough to carry authority in the way he moved, in the way his eyes took. In the scene with a single sweep that missed nothing, and the three men at the counter straightened almost unconsciously, their earlier swagger tightening into something more controlled. The owner. He walked forward without rushing, his gaze settling first on the paper in the man's hand, then on the woman standing across from them. And something in his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to signal recognition, or at least understanding. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice heavy, and for a second, none of the three answered, because the dynamic had shifted again, this time more sharply. "She's, asking about this," the first man said, holding up the paper, his earlier confidence now edged with uncertainty, and the owner took it, reading it quickly, his eyes narrowing just slightly before he looked up at her. "You wrote this?" he asked, and she nodded. There was a pause, a longer one this time, and then the owner exhaled quietly, folding the paper once before setting it back on the counter. "Get the case from the back," he said to the others, his tone leaving no room for argument, and all three of them blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, you serious?" one of them said, unable to hide his surprise, and the owner's gaze snapped to him, not angry, but firm in a way that made the question die halfway to completion. "Now?" he said, and that was enough. They moved quickly now, the earlier mockery gone, replaced by something closer to unease, when they disappeared. Into the back room, the owner turned back to her, studying her for a moment longer before speaking again. "Most people don't walk in here asking for that," he said, and she gave a small, almost tired shrug. "Most people don't see what I see," she replied, and there was something in that answer, something heavy, something real, that settled into the space between them. "Hospital?" he asked, and she nodded again. "Trauma," she said, and that single,